All right.
Hello,
Hi,
hello.
guys. Hi, everyone, and welcome to WEDVIBES live session. And I'm extremely glad to see familiar faces. Glad to see you again.
Hello,
And
hello.
Hi.
today's session, yeah, they're actually, what is it? May, the season right around the corner. And I know that you are busy. A lot
Yes.
of you very busy, and I'm so glad that you made it live. And I'm sending special hi to our New Zealand, Australia, and Asian members who will watch the recording. And this session, trust me, will be very special because we will talk about the hottest and the hardest topics, but that is a big component of the success. It is pricing. And we have amazing speakers with us, the most experienced and experienced and expertised wedding planners known in the US and I believe worldwide. It is Bash Please team, Sunna and Mollie. And you are the best people to unfold this hard topic and cover all the questions like the flat fee and percentage, how to negotiate conversations, how to actually even find yourself amongst other professionals and price yourself. And I ask everyone who joined today to be present and to take advantage of this 1 hour that ladies are investing into us, sharing their wisdom. So please ask questions, give comments, and be active. Put the chat on fire. And before we dive in, I see that you already started greeting everyone. That's really great. But I want to show that we have members all over the world, and I will ask you to introduce yourself as a tradition. Put in the chat your name, your location, and your profession. And with that, I will pass over to Daria. And Daria, you can give the great introduction to amazing speakers, Sunna and Mollie, who will be sharing their wisdom today.
Yeah, that's my favorite part, to give introduction for the speakers who needs no introduction, but I will still try and do my best. Yeah, so welcome, welcome. You can see those two gorgeous ladies on the screen. It's Molly and Sana, the inspiration and the brain power behind Bash Please, one of the best wedding planning agencies in the world. And that's not only my words and my belief, but also we have the proof from the magazines like Brides, Vogue, and Harper's Bazaar. And of course, they are known for their ability to create one-of-the-kind events. And we personally are huge fans of their work. We know how they can create and like push the creative boundaries while maintaining this sense of refined sophistications. And their attention to the detail is out of this world, I would say. Why is it super important to hear from those like two ladies today? They are, of course, as a planners, they know everything about everyone's pricing, and the pricing strategy is the hot topic right now. Plus, they have 2 decades, right? 2 decades of experience in the upscale event and hospitality industry. And yes, today we're going to hear their firsthand about their take on building pricing strategy and communicating it to the clients so the clients cannot resist your offer. So Molly and Sana, thank you so much for being here, for finding time. Especially, yes, the season has already started, so I know how busy you are. And with that, we are passing it over to you. And yeah, let's start the session today.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. We're excited to be here. Great introduction. Appreciate it. I think, Daria, the very big thing that you said is pricing is a hot topic, and it definitely is. And I think that is something that comes up all the time when we're with other event industry professionals, when we're on our own inquiry calls with potential clients of how we charge, why do we charge that, what's involved in all of those things. And I think that, at Bash Please, we've really done our pricing in a multiple different ways. And we've kind of done, and tested different models that are working for us. I think, really in the event industry, because there's not necessarily a full standardization or kind of bar of entry, everybody gets to kind of start however they want to and however they feel comfortable. And really the fees that we're looking at, there are planners that charge a flat fee for their services. There are planners that charge a percentage of the overall investment. There are also planners that charge a little bit of both and kind of a mix between that. Some may even charge hourly too. And, there's certainly not a wrong way or a right way to charge. I think that it's really specific to, the way that it works for your business. And I think obviously if we go to kind of the first slide that we have there, kind of talking about that flat fee versus percentage pricing too. And it's really about, again, as we say here, models that fit the moment and how it's going to work for your clients. As I mentioned, we've done a number of different types of pricing throughout our years here. We have charged flat fees in the past. Currently, we're using a percentage-based model. Typically, we go anywhere from 15 to 20% of the overall investment. And really where we range of that percentage happens to be, scope. Sometimes things are included more. We have some corporate clients that are at the 20% mark, but everything, as far as production labor, sometimes travel is included in that. So they really only have to, spend time reflecting on one number. We have other clients, that are new weddings that we are working with where we do kind of our, I would say, more typical 18% of the overall investment. And, then we still have our production team and our travel on site as we do, primarily destination events too. And then we also, are kind of down at the lower end of that range at 15% as well for, past clients or, repeat clients that are having another sibling that's getting married too. And so it really is kind of a variation as far as everything. And it's not always set. There's also times that, we may have done a wedding for clients and then they call us for a small birthday party or a party that's going to be at their house. And, that percentage that we offer them allows them when, the investment of the events are actually on a smaller scale too, that they can still have our support for planning and design. And it's not going to be the same investment that they had for, their daughter's wedding as well. So I think with just being able to be flexible that way, it allows us to stay competitive. There are some people that reach out to us that really truly feel strongly that, they want to have a flat fee based on maybe what they read on a blog or on Reddit or, somewhere on social media too. And we always kind of just talk to them and educate a little bit more about why we charge a percentage. And I think, it's very specific to that. We've really kind of started realizing that the amount of work that we put into each event, it really varies. And again, on some of these smaller events, it's less hours of our time. And so, the overall investment might be less, whereas, a wedding could be pretty standard. But what we've learned more often than not is, an engagement period, ideas can certainly evolve and they can change. And really where the wedding began might not be where the wedding ended up. And it might be something that turned into multiple days where originally they were only thinking about a one-day event. And then, brought us on to help with pre-events or post-events or, anything kind of in between as well. And the percentage model just really helps be flexible. And honestly, at the end of the day, help kind of the overall profit line too.
Yeah. And I think just on that too, with like this big, bold writing of pricing models that fit the moment, I think what we would encourage is for everybody to figure out what that moment is to them. Is the moment what the industry is saying? The industry is saying everybody should charge a percentage, or is the industry saying everybody should charge X percentage? Like, that's not really what we mean by fitting the moment. I think what the moment is what's best for your business. If the moment right now is, we're starting to book for 2026. People are worried about the economy. They're worried about looming recessions. There's all sorts of, you know, different things in the media that people are reading. You know, certain clients are being a little bit more protective with their own investments, how they get their money. You might have a client who's waiting for their AI business to, you know, hit the market and take off. Like, the moment is different for all of the clients. And then therefore you have to adjust and make the moment different for your business. I mean, even outside of planning, if you're a photographer, videographer, what does the moment pricing model look like for you? Does it look like, oh, these other 5 photographers are charging this, but you know what, right now I need to charge this so that I can, you know, be profitable in my own business, or so that I can continue to grow my business. And I think it's just really about sitting down and figuring out, kind of blacking out what maybe everybody else is doing, and really trying to figure out what this moment means to you. And I do think it's kind of hard. We always say in the industry, like, you know, right now it's 2025, and yes, we're in the nitty-gritty of 2025, but we're always kind of working a year ahead, which isn't the case for most industries and most people's jobs. But we have to do things right now that affect what happens and what next year looks like, which sometimes can be a little scary. Do you wait? Do you wait things out? You know, if after this, you know, meeting today, everybody decides, okay, I want to charge a percentage, like, that doesn't mean that you have to stick to it and jump in. It means that you can transition. You can say, okay, for 2026, I want to try it. I have to implement it now. I have to start building the blocks to charge a percentage. And maybe I'll do that for 2 jobs for next year, but the rest will keep my flat fee. And just slowly transition into what that looks like for you, how you talk about it, how you explain it, what the wording is. And you might really be able to get those jobs booked for next year. And then you kind of know, okay, things are balanced. But I think just overall, the model is tricky, and you have to really be confident in how you talk about it. I mean, I think even in the beginning, we transitioned during COVID, during 2020, from a flat fee to a percentage. And it was such a weird time. We kind of just kept trying it and just, you know, see what sticks. Everything seemed so far out and so far away. I mean, in 2020, we were getting some calls for 2022. Like, people wanted to fully skip the year of 2021 because it was so uncertain still. And so we were like, let's just try it, you know, and we said some things that were probably wrong, and you know, kind of did things that way. Or we had people come to us and say, well, do you charge a percentage or do you charge a flat fee? And we were like, okay, let's try a percentage, you know. We weren't so strict with ourselves. Like, Mollie does all of our, you know, initial inquiry meetings, and she was fluid in the way she talked to people. If it seemed like the right time to try it, we tried it. If it seemed like a time to kind of back off because maybe the initial client said, like, well, we talk to other people that charge a percentage and we don't want to do that. We're like, okay, well, how much do we want this wedding? How much do we want to work here? Maybe they came to us and they already had their photographer, and, you know, we're like, oh, we really want to work with that person, like, flat fee it is. So I just think, and we can talk about it towards the end with some questions, but I think if you're just uncertain about diving in, I think you just have to think about the moment and take every, you know, every inquiry, every lead, every job, every referral, you know, in a way that works for you, and commit to whatever that is, whether it's a small amount in the beginning or sink or swim approach. Whatever works in your business is what you should do, for sure.
So that's a great answer to the first question. What to choose depending on the situation, because it's a hard choice.
Yeah.
So probably there is not a one answer for forever. Like, it's not written in the stone. You make a decision, made all the components you put on the table.
Yeah, and even, you know, today, now we've been doing a percentage model for the last, what, 5 years, and we still, you know, waver back and forth sometimes if it makes sense for us too. And I think regardless of what's out there on the industry and whatever you're seeing on social media, other people do that too. They do what's right for their business.
For the business.
100%. And if you're not doing that, then I think that, you know, I mean, I guess good for you if you really just stick to it.
That's actually, thank you for saying this, because there are so many claims, but in the reality, if you really do business, there are so many decisions behind the scenes that the real professionals who work and who have real weddings, they make those decisions. So yeah,
And
that's great that you
say,
highlight.
we always say too, you know, for us, when we make the decision on what we're going to charge and what model fits for us, it's based on the fact that we have our business in California, which is a very expensive state to have a business in. We have, you know, full-time employees that work for us, which is also very expensive in California. You know, we offer all sorts of different, you know, healthcare benefits, things like that. That's expensive. We have brick and mortar offices, which are expensive. I mean, if you're somebody who, you know, is able to work at home, you know, only work with freelancers, you bring them on when you need to, those are totally different overhead costs, which are great for you. You know, maybe you can try charging a certain way 1 or 2 times, and that's enough for your year. So it's just really different for everyone. And there's so many different things. And I just think a lot of times social media especially can be a really big smoke screen for people where they're not understanding what, you know, may or may not happen, you know, when the camera's away, we'll say, you know, when the
behind the scenes.
off. Yeah.
Yeah.
What decisions people have to make, you know? So I think it's just really important to, you know, have people that you can call, people you can email that are in the industry, especially if you don't have a team. If you're somebody that works, you know, primarily alone as a planner, you can maybe call another planner. You can call a photographer or, you know, somebody who does invitations, a graphic designer, to just talk about what things look like for you, and always be kind of looking at your year, you know, as a whole. What does it look like if you make this decision this time? And then how does that pricing affect the next time?
Great.
Yeah, I think like
Oh,
everyone is just listening intensely and like trying to digest this, and I think we're gonna go like to the next slide, because like I have some questions from like a photographer's perspective, but I'm gonna save them for the end.
later.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So speaking of photographers, just kind of navigating through these conversations that you have with potential clients with confidence. I mean, we can only talk from the planner designer lens of how we navigate the conversations, but I think, you know, one of the first things, especially if you're charging a percentage, is people say right off the bat, well, how do I know you're not going to pick all of the most expensive vendors? Because then you make more money. I think that's a big halt in just conversation to begin with, because if you've done yourself a service of charging a percentage, you have to explain to the clients how you prioritize bringing on vendors. It's not just about jumping in and charging, you know, XYZ and going to the top of things or going to the bottom of things. It's about understanding what's important to your client, what their priorities are. And then once you know that, a client may say, photography is not the most important thing to me, a band is. And then therefore, again, it might not be the most expensive band and it might not be the least expensive photographer, but you have a baseline and you have a conversation with them that makes sense. And then when you leave the conversation, you feel confident in how you're going to approach these vendors. Just because I think we see a lot of photographers in the chat, we'll use that as an example. When we go to photographers, whether we're charging a percentage really or a flat fee, we've determined with our client what's most important to them when it comes to photography. So we have what they want to spend, give or take, within a pretty good range, how much coverage they need. And then we go to those photographers and we say, hey, so-and-so, you know, our client has, I'll just use flat numbers. Our client has a $30,000 budget for photography. They want this much coverage. We need a second shooter because of our location and our guest count. they're awesome. Here's a little bit more about them. Here's maybe kind of a working mood board if we're at that stage. You know, we've either worked together or we would love to build a relationship working with you. Like, how does that look for you? And that photographer might come back and say, it's not going to work. It's totally out of our price scope. Like, we can't do it. Or it might be an opportunity for somebody who would have been a lot less to be like, now's a really good time for me to maybe charge a little bit more because they're saying, you know, to be competitive, this is where I need to be. Maybe I could even come in a little under. You know, if they're asking for 30, I could come in at 25 and look like a star, you know? And so those are just conversations that we have very transparently with all of our vendors. And then in turn, I think a thing that's really important when you start charging a percentage, you have to know if your clients want to speak with vendors or not. Some people are really busy. They hire a planning company to just trust them and say, I like their work, let's book it, it fits the budget. But also some people are, especially with a percentage in the beginning of onboarding, can be really shy and they can say, you know, gosh, the pricing is really, you know, different. Like, I'd love to just talk to them. And then we prep that photographer. We say, like, you have to go in now and sell yourself. You have to talk about your approach. You have to talk about your reason why, what your deliverables are, how you edit, like the whole, you know, you basically have to have your sales pitch. And you have to be confident in why you charge what you do. If we have a client, for example, this happened to us, you know, we had a client that came back and said, whoa, this photographer that you pitched, my friend worked with them last year and their pricing was half. And so we talked to that photographer and we said, it's now, the ball's in your court. You can say, like, they got married in 2023. We're talking in 2024 for 2025. That's essentially 3 years, you know, my pricing has grown. You know, the scope of what Bash Please is telling me is very different. Let me walk you through that. This is what your friend maybe had. Your complexities are different. So I do think a lot of times as planners, we really want to handhold and walk all of the vendors through, you know, all of their, you know, sales process. But I think it is important that they can kind of come to the table and say, you know, very clearly, this is why I charge this, this is what I charge. And so it's like a two-way education, and it really does save kind of headache down the line. Because what we don't want is for somebody to say, oh yeah, I can make that price work. And then when we get into it, they're like, well, you know, it's a hair and makeup vendor. And they're like, well, I didn't think I was staying for touch-ups. Or, you know, it's a photographer that, you know, said, oh, okay, I can do 6 hours, but like, who's doing 6 hours? You know, we're always starting at 10 hours. So I think it's just really being mindful of having those, laying it all out on the table at first and not gunning shy from conversations that you're going to have eventually. We'd rather do it all in the beginning and feel confident going forward.
I think too, to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, you know, it's not often that clients that we're working with come to us already with vendors in play, but especially with the Gen Z world of everything at your fingertips on social media, there are a lot of times, you know, that someone will come and say, well, I actually already reached out to this photographer and this is the cost that they give us. And that sounds great. We usually reach out, but I think that, you know, kind of as our slide here says, that the cheapest quote doesn't necessarily account for logistics. So that photographer that they reached out to, for no fault at all of their own, who didn't know any of the details, gave them a fee. And, you know, again, for flat numbers, maybe they said, oh yeah, we can do everything for $15,000. But then when we get introduced to a photographer and say, it's actually 10 hours, it's on top of a mountain, they're getting ready, you know, 20 miles away, there's this, there's that. And then we come back with the actual quote, you know, it just really starts factoring in all of the logistics that will go into the pricing of things. And, you know, that's obviously a photography reference too, but this could be in any vendor that is around.
It happens all the time. People will say, well, I already booked the venue, so you don't get your percentage on the venue. And it's like, not so fast. Here's everything that now has to happen with the venue. You know, when you're putting in hours of work, figuring out what the venue has to offer, you know, when you can load in, when you have to strike, can you stake on their grass? Maybe the venue does all food and beverage. So there is this like underlining sense that people say like, already have my venue, so you shouldn't get a percentage on that. But like finding the venue, sure, can be challenging sometimes. Sometimes it can take a while, but locking in a venue is such a, I would say if it was based on a 0 to 100%, locking in a venue is 10%. So all the 90% that's left, like your planner is still working on and still doing. So again, I think those are conversations that in the very beginning you have to really have with the client to say, here's why, even though you may have found this vendor directly, their line item and their cost still comes into our budget. For example, if somebody's like, I have my dress. Okay, well, your attire then your wedding dress does not need to go into your event budget, we'll call it. You found the dress, you're gonna go on your own and do all of your fittings and alterations. We're not coming. Okay, sure, then we don't have, anything to do with the dress. But it's very different than when you have your own hair and makeup team and we're still communicating with them. We're still writing the timelines. We're maybe booking their accommodations, their travel, their, all sorts of different things. So it just depends on how you, also line out your own budget, what's included in your budget. If somebody's working with a bridal stylist and you're managing that stylist, then I would say that would go in your budget. So that might be a question that comes up later, like what kind of to include or not include in a budget. But I think that's always kind of a tricky, challenging one that just sometimes takes a lot of conversations.
And also
Yeah.
experience on your end and understanding what comes with the secured venue or makeup artist. It comes from the experience and also kind of thoughtfully analyzing the amount of resource and investment you put into serving every vendor out of the wedding. So that's why I also want to highlight this idea, because I believe that, especially I know that not everyone is a planner and there are a lot of questions from photographers, but for the planners who are listening to us right now, especially at earlier stage, it feels like, yeah, I can cover that. That's my job. Yes, but this is something what you charge for. Even some vendor has already been chosen and secured by the couple. There is like a huge amount of whatever, like communication and management that you put in place, and you are the first person who first of all acknowledge that and then shape it into the, communicate it to the client in a very confident way. Otherwise, you will always be a little bit upset that clients not lining up to pay you extra just because you didn't explain or educate them what exactly you've done serving the makeup artist. Does it make sense? Because to me, it feels like not even everyone understands that.
Yeah.
Speaking of planners, and can communicate it and have the confidence or liberty to sit down and say, hey, yes, makeup, you've chosen her, and we will do this and that to make it happen and to make this makeup artist to come on the day of the wedding and do it his or her job. So that's important to me. Really analyze your input and speak out with the confidence.
Yeah, and I think on that note too, that raises another thing that does happen when you charge a percentage. If I'm just going to use something really silly, if somebody says like, I don't know if I want a wedding cake or not, like, maybe we like the way this cake looks, or we come up with a design and we're like, this would be beautiful, and they're like, I don't know, we're on the fence. My parents want a cake, we don't want a cake. We could go out, get all these cake sketches done, find the best cake maker, do a cake tasting, all sorts of different things. You've done hours worth of work. And at the end, they could say, we don't want a cake. We decided, we're not going to do a wedding cake. You don't get compensated for that time because now there's no line item of a wedding cake in your budget. So it's like, again, what are the and that does happen even to us. It happens to everyone. But, and that's a small thing, some wedding cakes can be very expensive, but for the most part, something like that, or like a photo booth, things like that can be small line items. But for hair and makeup, for example, if you spend, a month looking at hair and makeup artists, you're booking trials, doing this, it could potentially be a $10,000 plus line item in your budget. And then they come back and say, I don't like anybody that you found. I'm going to do my own hair and makeup. you know, then you're not compensated for that time. And that is just part of the process, you know, and part of the learning curve, I would say. Whereas if you charged a flat fee, you're quote unquote being compensated for all of your time and all of your work with that flat fee.
Yeah, I mean, the more I'm listening to the stories, the more I understand that we need to start gathering, like creating the book of the planners behind the scenes process. Because like for everyone, like, because yes, we have like so many people from other professions, but for every planner who is listening, we believe that this is the hardest profession in the industry in terms of how you can showcase your actual work.
Yeah.
Right. And like this is why it's also important to tell those stories, to tell how you overcome some crisis, like some force majeures, like or some experience you deliver to the clients, something that's so beneath the surface that you don't see. Because like with photographers, it's like more transparent, like what you actually do. And we're gonna also dive into like the conversation about photographers pricing. Yeah, but for the planners, it's all come with experience, right? Because people expect the turnkey approach from you.
Yeah.
So
No fault to the client. Most of our clients that are coming to us are getting married for the first time, and they also don't necessarily know what anything should cost. I mean, we can put together an initial estimate, and people will be, you know, shocked at how much hair and makeup could be. And then when we talk about why it goes in and we've educated them, then they kind of understand that too. But it's a constant evolving thing that if we wrote a book, we would need to keep those pages fluid too, because it's constantly changing.
I love like
Right.
someone has expressive feelings and started drawing
It's
on the
always, we
deck.
have a lot of artists, they start drawing. So we
Yeah.
actually have a lot of questions in the chat, but I don't know, shall we just get back to them?
I think let's continue
Yeah, let's
and maybe
just collect all the questions. Guys, you can just keep putting the questions in the chat, and then we will collect them and answer.
yes.
Perfect. So continuing to talk about our pricing strategy, again, I think that, you know, as we've said, every client, everyone has a different overall budget. What they also value is important. You know, there might be clients that everything is about the entertainment, and that's really they want to put their focus into. Or it might also be that someone doesn't necessarily care about entertainment, and photography is everything they want, because that's really kind of the one tangible thing that you get, you know, at the end of your wedding. So, you know, I think that with that being said, your own pricing should be able to, you know, stand firm when you want it to be, and also be flexible. You know, for instance, you know, we have the lucky fortune of doing multiple siblings weddings, and you know, there might be lots of years in between. And when we did, you know, the first siblings wedding, we might have been charging a flat fee. And then when the second sibling came, the parents said, we'd love just to work the way that we did last time. And while we're now at a percentage, it might just make more sense because we love this family. We know how great they are to work with. We know how, you know, wonderful they make things and easy on payments and everything else. And so we might just also stay with a flat fee. And I think that, you know, it's not that we're undervaluing ourselves or our work. It's just, it's really strategic, because we also know that that family may have 2 more siblings, and they may not all decide to have a wedding, but if they do, it's our hope that we'll be part of that too.
And I think being transparent with the, you know, if it's a legacy family, being transparent with them. We now charge like this, but because we worked together in the past, we will charge that way, because that client is a referral to their friends and their family. So we also want to make sure when they go to somebody and says, oh my God, we loved so-and-so's wedding, like, can you put us in contact? What did they charge? They could say like, oh, you know, we still got, you know, X pricing, but, you know, they do charge a percentage or whatever that may be. I think it's just important to really be transparent and say like what you are currently doing, also so that they know they're getting, you know, you at a value, and that really helps. But also then saying, but just so you know, like, we worked together 5 years ago. The vendors that we worked with 5 years ago now do charge different, and we can't ask them, nor will we ask them, to charge what they charged 5 years ago. Like, things do change for other people. So again, it's like making sure just what works with you strategically might not work with everybody else. So I think that's really, really important. And I think also just making sure that you know that everybody doesn't have to be priced the same. I think there's some like weird thing in the industry that like everybody wants everyone to be the same price, which sure, I guess from a planner's perspective, that puts everybody on like this really lovely playing field, right? Everyone charges 15% of the budget. You call so-and-so, they charge that way. You call us, we charge that way. Then you really are picking people based on their personality or their work or a referral from a friend. But that's just not reality. Reality is everybody charges different. There's no rule that says everyone has to charge the same. You know, if you're a film photographer and you live in Seattle, you might charge really different than a film photographer that lives in California. You know, maybe you're somebody who doesn't really want to do international weddings. So for you to go to Italy from California, you're like, I'm charging this. If they want me there, you know, that takes me out for a full month. I won't do anything else that month. I have to charge this way to do that. And so just because everybody else is dying to get on a plane in the summer and go to Italy, like that might just not work for you. And I think it's okay to say to yourself and to other people, like, unfortunately, that's not going to work for me. Like, this is where I have to kind of hold firm. And some people are really attracted to that approach. I mean, there's some planners out there that we see and we're like, wow, they really stuck it out there and it landed. You know, they're not budgeting and they're really doing what works for them. Maybe it's for, you know, they have a family or again, they have employees, whatever it is. But I just think it's just pricing yourself out in a strategy that works long term. Because I think as everybody probably on this meeting knows, even if you're, you know, in your first year, it's really easy to burn out. And if you're working every single weekend, that's an easy way to burn out. If you're traveling all the time, that's an easy way to burn out. So you have to decide, you know, do you want volume? Do you just want to get a lot under your belt? Or do you want to be really key and strategic in, you know, how you work? And I think, you know, it's tricky being a vendor on the other end, not a planner, because maybe you're just dying to work with, you know, Mindy Weiss contacts you and you're like, I wasn't only going to take 20 weddings this year. And like, now she's the 21st, but like, of course you're doing the wedding with Mindy Weiss. You know, it's like the opportunity of your career maybe. So you make an exception. And I think that's, again, just like fitting into the moment. Maybe you charge a little bit more because, you know, you probably can, and that works for you. You know, so I think it's just about figuring out the pricing that works and kind of going from there. Whether it's a venue, maybe a venue gives you a referral and, you know, it's a venue you've been dying to work at. And you're like, if I say no because the client can't afford it, is this venue ever going to refer me again? Maybe you have to pick up the phone and call the venue and say, hey, Molly, like, I'm dying to work there, but like this pricing just isn't going to work. Like, you know, maybe I can try to get them up, maybe I can make it work. And that is a relationship you want to build with a venue, you know? So I think it's just like figuring out that strategy for you. And again, being transparent with the venue. It didn't work this time because of this, but like, I'm going to try to make it work next time.
Yeah, that's a very hot topic, yeah, also in the industry. And I can see like there like some dialogue happening in the chat. This, like you mentioned, Sana is like the photographer, for example, or, you know, like planner in Seattle or in California, but we also have the people who work in different countries, and the prices could just vary drastically in terms of like how in the different markets there are different perception on how the work should be done. It all like it regards in referral, how many hours do you put into your work as a planner? It's like there, unfortunately or fortunately, there are no standardized like approach in this industry. So of course you have to have like your baseline, but because like all the projects they're different, you have to have like some customizable approach to like every inquiry you have, like every opportunity you have. And
Yeah,
that's
room to
the
make
reality. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that because so many professionals, especially planners, exhausted by making a decision. Is it if like, shall I stick to one strategy or another? Or the wedding photographers, like how many weddings shall I take? Also the price range. But what you now said, you allowed everyone to make a decision considering every opportunity and analyzing it. And the biggest insight is, first, it starts with you and what you want for your business. And then based off this understanding that should be clear, that is the number one to decide, you identify the opportunity and you say yes or no. That helps, rather than being exhausted and making decisions of I have to stick to this amount of weddings, or I have to stick to this amount of price range. So it's a bit different. It's like stick to your business strategy or vision that you have for your business, and that will be your North Star, if I pronounce it right, of like saying yes or no to all opportunities coming your way. So that's the great way to put it to me in decision making.
And I mean, we've noticed on the planning side, at least, the window for planning has gotten a lot smaller. I think Molly mentioned like the Gen Z timeline is just a lot shorter, whereas, you know, maybe millennials were planning for a full year. I mean, we have clients that are reaching out to us for in 3 months. So if you take everything, then you're not leaving any room for maybe something that could be really great. But again, that strategy has to work for you. If you're like, I'm leaving 2 bookings open because I know something last minute is going to come in, it's wonderful, it's insane, it's going to be great, then that has to work for you. But if you can't pay your office rent, you know, then you have to take whatever's coming in first. So you have to figure out that strategy for yourself.
Yeah, that's true. And feel confident. All right. So there are so many questions. Let's move to the next topic, and then we will have time.
We kind of covered a bit of this slide as we've just been kind of talking to, as Sunna just mentioned too, that, you know, if you book yourself up in a certain way, you may not leave room for, you know, things that you want to do. And I think that, you know, all of your pricing, however you are doing flat fees or percentage, just it needs to evolve with your skill set and then also where you want to be. And I say that as, you know, if you want to have all destination weddings in Europe in your portfolio, well, you may need to start on a certain fee structure that aligns with where you want to be until you can kind of get there. If you're also, as you know, Sunna mentioned too, trying to just fill up your calendar every year and it works for you to be able to do a percentage. I will say that doing a percentage requires so much more detail and attention to time of every single proposal that comes in. Anytime a proposal changes from a vendor, you've got to be in the budget, making sure that everything aligns, because your fee at the end of the day, you know, comes from that. And that's not to say that if you charge a flat fee, you're not looking at their budget, but you also have to know that in your volume of business, can you also dedicate that amount of time to the accounting piece of things? Maybe you shouldn't be taking, you know, 20 weddings a year at a percentage if you can't have the time for that too.
Yeah, the admin alone on that would be a full-time job.
Yeah, definitely. But I think, yeah, I mean, there are so many questions. We are happy to kind of jump in and answer some of those with the timing that we have left, and just kind of go from there.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's talk pricing. Yeah, so I'm gonna go from like the first question from Monica. It's regarding the wedding planner's perspective. How do you calculate your percentage, and do you include all the vendors? I ask because it may happen that the client contacts some vendors directly, and they don't inform us about the related expenses.
That would be fun on the day of the wedding to have someone show up that you had no idea that they were coming. But I think that, you know, we really consider every vendor that we will ever come in contact with at all part of the wedding investment. As Sunna said earlier, if someone goes and gets their wedding dress 100% on their own, we don't talk about where to go, where the fittings are, any of that. That is fine. It doesn't need to go in the investment. But the day of styling services that we're going to manage to prep the garments and steam them and help them, you know, kind of get into the garments, that will definitely go into the overall budget too. One of the things that we personally do not put in an investment, and this should be different for everyone, we are also a registered travel agent. So if we are doing any hotel blocks or hotel buyouts too, it is stated very clearly in that contract that the Bash Please company is getting a commission on those rooms. And so really, so that we're not double charging, that is never in the budget. But again, if that is not something that, you know, you have the ability to make commission on that, and yet you're still managing hotel rooms, especially when it comes to a buyout. We have so many clients that, you know, will have different rates for different friends and family, and we're the ones that are really kind of being the concierge for that too.
Okay, thank you. And the question from Xanath, I hope I pronounced your name right. I'm gonna rephrase it, but the whole question here is about, I know that you do destination weddings as well. And how do you explain to the clients, because like in different countries, yes, there's different approach to some work. For example, they can find someone local in Italy, and the whole process would be completely different from the American approach, for example. And like they both like benefits and the like bookings, the American planner or like Italian planner. But how would you explain like in this like competitive market that you will charge this price and like this is okay in this region, or like do you have maybe different prices like for different destinations, different regions?
We don't necessarily right now have different pricing for different destinations. We do know that, you know, cost of goods in every destination is going to be different. So that may overall affect what a client's investment looks like. For instance, a couple of years ago, we had a client that was looking in the Napa Valley of California and also in Paris. And while they lived in the US, after doing all of the cost comparison, the costs are actually less to go to Paris and bring everyone. So we ended up having the wedding there. So that also can really kind of change the way that an overall investment is. I think most of the time our clients specifically are taking us and are from the US and going to a destination. So I really think that, you know, the value of having us versus kind of a planner that's on the ground too is we're providing so much of like the concierge portion of the planning for their guests too. And not just, you know, the actual planning, which again, you know, when we go to a destination where we don't speak the language, we personally bring in someone on our side to help with that, because we know that a lot of, you know, vendors that are there don't automatically speak English, or it's not their most comfortable language.
I think too, if I'm understanding maybe a part of the question correctly, is in other places, like we'll just use Italy as an example. A lot of times planners in Italy get compensated directly from venues or vendors. So their overall fee might look less than our fee because we don't get, you know, whatever you want to call it, commission from the venue, etc. You know, if it's a planner that works there all the time and that's the relationship they have with them, that's the deal that they have, then a portion, you know, comes from that. Or maybe the venue pays the caterer a portion, or the caterer pays the venue a portion. Then those pricing, that pricing structure is going to be skewed compared to what it is here. So that could be a
Yeah, exactly. We also have a question here, in terms of referral, and we do have we have the people here from all around the world, and they like different approaches. How do you feel like what's like the normality, let's say in American market about referral fee? Like, do you expect from your vendors to give you the referrals, or like do you think like it's?
Or if you don't expect, if they reach out.
What's your take here? On the referrals.
On a referral fee? No, I don't think, I mean, I would say common practice in the US is that there's not really referral fees being exchanged. Again, I think that like with venues and caterers, there might be some times where like, you know, if a venue, let's say in Los Angeles, only allows 4 caterers to work there, that could be one of 2 things. It could be ease of working together, and that's just like they want it to be simple on their venue. Or it could be, yes, that caterer pays the venue back a percentage, but if a venue refers us, we never pay them a fee. Of course, you know, I guess indirectly, you know, if we do a really successful wedding at a hotel in Mexico, we might then send, you know, the person that we worked with like a nice gift after, saying like, thank you so much for working with us, your hard work. Here's like a massage or something like that, or a bottle of wine, but never an actual like monetary referral fee is exchanged. Again, I think if a planner, you know, books a photographer and a photographer is so excited and the photographer wants to send them, you know, a thank you card with a bottle of wine or something, like, I think that's fine. Maybe in other countries that more transactional fee is common. And I think it goes back to the same thing. If that's common where you are or in the market that you work with, I think that's great. But I think if a client asks you, you have to be honest about it.
I think that I just want to elaborate on this question because no one knows what is normal. Because let's say there are so many people ask us about if it's normal. And the biggest question is about, I'm a photographer and I want to reach out to planner and like establish connection. So if I reach out to planner and say, hey guys, if I will secure a wedding with you, I will give you 10% out of my fee. That is the biggest question here. So
I don't think that you should do that. I don't think you should do that.
No.
So that was actually the question. So you think it's relatable to American market or just generally speaking to the relationship between planner and vendors?
I mean, we could be really wrong. Maybe just nobody's ever offered that to us. I don't know.
Yeah, that's some opportunities to explore, by the way.
Yeah.
At least that was an eye-opening session for you. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
to take
in other markets. I also, because we are Europeans, Daria and I, and we have also a lot of members and experience in different markets. So in majority of markets, that's common, actually. Okay. Yeah.
I think in
I cannot
European
say
markets,
that it's written
common.
like that it's written somewhere, but it's unspoken way of connecting with planners. So, but in American market, it's less common, but the question still like asked because this is how you feel that you can secure the project. So your question is no, and you never like experienced that.
No, yeah, correct. We have not experienced that.
Okay, so yeah, the next question is from the photographer perspective. What are some pricing mistakes or friction points you've seen from photographers, videographers that make it hard for you to pitch them?
Ooh, what a good
Like
question.
some mistakes, maybe like how they approach the whole conversation.
One, maybe not, I don't necessarily know if it's something to pitch them, but I do think after you complete a wedding as a photographer or a videographer, like once the wedding's over, you're really technically the only person whose work's not done. So I think a lot of times photographers kind of like, okay, I'll get to it when I get to it. I'll, you know, stop all communication. And then we're constantly the ones following up, like, hey, can you give us an ETA? And not unreasonably, we're not emailing them next week saying, where are their images? You know, we look at the contract. If the contract says, you know, maybe it's 8 weeks or 12 weeks, we'll put it on our own calendar. We'll follow up maybe 2 weeks before that saying, hey, just based on the contract, in 6 weeks from now, we're expecting these deliverables. And then if they say, well, I'm not going to be able to do that. And it's like, well, no, actually, you have to do that. So I think that for us is a really big sticking point, like how photographers and videographers handle their deliverables and the after kind of the wedding. It really does put that taste in a planner's mouth of pitching them for the next time. And it's not saying you have to do it fast or anything, but you do have to just stick to what you said and not, and you know, that's another thing when you're planning out your own calendar, you have to look back at your own contracts and say, okay, I've booked all these weddings, but this contract with Bashly says I'm going to have, because a lot of times we'll say like, in order to book this job, this is the deadline when they want these photos. Or if it's something that you guys are publishing or Vogue is publishing, you know, there might be a date attached to it that they're required. And if you mess that up or you can't deliver when you said you were going to deliver, that's, I think, the worst mistake people can make.
Yeah, thanks so much.
So maybe we can move to cover one more question, right? There is one
because I see we have like 3 minutes left. I think maybe like the main question here would be from the videographer's perspective, if you work with them like for the first time, for example, and you have inquiry for the clients, how, and maybe we're turning, like we're going in circles in terms of the customizable approach, but you can build on this. Like how, for example, me as a photographer, I can create the price list or the guide that like with no mistakes, like how to do it like in the right way for you. Like to ask you about the budget or like to ask you like more questions, like what would you recommend like me to do, like some sort of maybe like the simple guideline.
Well, I feel like, and at least our approach when we are reaching out to photographers, I think we usually from the sense of work can have a general idea maybe of what range they might be in. And we're also really proactive about sharing where our clients' range is going to be from day one. So instead of you sending us, this is package A or package B, we're going to come to you and say, we have 3 days of events, this many hours every day, these are the locations, and this is the budget. Is this something you're interested in? And that might be something where a photographer either comes back and says, yes, that's perfect, I'd love to be considered. Or they can come back and say, actually, my rates for these days would actually be more, and here is why too. I think that it's very seldom that we're reaching out and asking for like a pricing guide from a photographer too. I think we just like keep the conversations open. And you know, we work with new vendors and you kind of have new relationships all the time. I think our kind of indirect rule for us is we don't want everyone to be new on an event and really have it kind of be like a trial run for the day. So it might be something that we're working with a new photographer, and once we book them, if we want to bring on videography, we'll talk to our client and say, hey, we should bring on someone that's either worked with the photographer already, so they kind of have their own, you know, way of moving around each other for the day that works, or a videographer that's already worked with us that understands kind of how we move throughout the wedding day too. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think one thing I would say, like one hot take tip for photographers is if we reach out, let's say as a planner, and we say, we're doing a wedding in Mexico, you know, this is the vibe, they're having a pool party one day, they're having a, you know, welcome party, and they're having a black tie style dinner. I think the best thing that a photographer can do is also anticipate the next round of things and say, this all sounds great, here's my pricing, or here's what that would look like for me. Also, here are 3 full galleries that are kind of similar to what your client's looking for, versus like, okay, great. And then now it's another email. We're like, great, do you have any galleries that are similar to this? So I think just like being proactive on like the photography or videography side of like what the planner might want next. And then also like only following up in one form of communication. If you email us to follow up and say, hey, just checking in on that information in those galleries I sent, don't also send an Instagram message saying, hey, following up on the email I sent, following up, like it's too much follow up. Like we know where you are. We're gonna get back to you, we promise. But I think a little nudge is good because everybody does get busy. And also I think sometimes, especially with photography and videography, it does take the clients a long time.
Whoa.
Oh, what's happening?
I think
So
someone just actually misplaced the question.
yeah, I think Alex, we can stop sharing the screen.
Yeah.
Wait, people are so like
Okay, but that
expressive.
was a good question though, but yeah.
I think
Yeah.
also just to kind of wrap up on the questions, I've seen this come through in a couple of different places of what is the best way to reach out to a planner, and that has come through. And I mean, I think that, you know, emailing about your company, being able to share some work, whether it's a website, whether it's an attachment, is great. You know, we're really fortunate that we get so many emails every day of so many vendors around the world, and we do our best to be able to reply back to at least say thanks or whatever it might be. But I do think it's important not to always try and be, let's schedule a call to connect, let's do that. That almost to us sometimes is more stressful to do that. But like, we will keep things in a folder. If someone reaches out to us that works in France, we're going to keep their work in a folder that when we book our next French wedding, wherever it might be, we're going to go back through and look at that too. So I can't speak for everyone, but we definitely always are kind of keeping everyone's information on file. And if it feels like the right fit, we will definitely kind of reach back out.
Yeah, that's a
They-
great point, and
they
thank you
didn't get back
for
to you, It's
answering.
not magic.
Yeah.
They say it simultaneously.
Yeah, and like I think like the one of the main points here, yes, is to be proactive, and like there are no trial runs for the upscale events. You have to somehow find a way, maybe like how to work with the planners or how to offer your services, and like it maybe besides the weddings, and like how to like get familiar in some networking events. Oh, I think Alina's in Italy, so the connection there.
Always great. I mean, we're happy to be a reference for any photographer that we work with that might be trying to be introduced to another photographer, or happy to facilitate an introduction. And I think that the same can be said, you know, if a photographer reaches out and says to us, hey, you know, I know that you work a lot with Kristen Marie Parker. I've also, you know, worked with her. She can use her as a reference to talk about my work. I think that that's great.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much. It was like such a hot topic. I saw so many comments and like discussions in the chat, and it's so useful. I think it's like it's actually priceless to hear all like your take for like such a difficult, I would say, subject, because yes,
And it was
everyone
such a big relief to so
yeah,
many.
big relief to hear some
There is
insights.
no good or bad answer. There is not a right or wrong strategy. That's a permission to make a decision based on the custom situation. Like we always speak about customized and tailored proposals. It's the same goes to you when in terms of how you make the decisions.
Exactly. And if there's any question that we didn't get to that somebody still has, please feel free. You can reach out to us. You know, our information's on our website, and we would be happy to get an answer to you.
Yep, thank you. Thank you
That's
for
very generous, ladies.
that's very generous. Yeah.
You
We go
said
back to
that.
our deck.
Okay,
What
guys.
is the question?
Do not open your email.
Okay, I
inbox
know. You need
today.
some extra traffic on your website. That's why you said.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Thank
Mollie,
you
Sunna,
guys so
thank you
much.
so much
Thanks
for
so
your
much. Talk to
wisdom.
you guys soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.